And as you proceed through theological studies and biblical studies, you'll encounter various interpretive methods, such as Black, Asian, feminist, Hispanic, LGBTQ. So the question then becomes, are their interpretations a kind of exegesis, or is it eisegesis? Are they reading into the text based on their own preconceived notions? Or is an example of exegesis applied? So this is a very famous book written by James Cone called The Cross and the Lynching Tree. And he makes a quite provocative claim. The cross can heal and hurt. It can be empowering and liberating, but also enslaving and oppressive. There's no one way in which the cross can be interpreted. I offer my reflections because I believe that the cross placed alongside the lynching tree can help us to see Jesus in America in a new light, and thereby empower people who claim to follow him to take a stand against white supremacy and every kind of injustice. So the provocative claim that Cone is making is that the cross of Christ can be compared with the lynching tree, in which African Americans were lynched. Now, do you think this is a case of exegesis applied, or perhaps it's a case of eisegesis? Maybe Cone is reading into the cross something that isn't there. Now, I'm not saying that it is, I'm not saying that it isn't, but this is just a question that I want you to constantly be asking yourself as you read various different types of theologies that exist. I want to introduce you to what's called a pericope. In the theology section of this week, we introduced form criticism and the idea of a pericope. Simply put, it is a unit, a section of a text, which is one coherent whole. In the process of exegesis, we want to focus on a whole unit, a pericope, not isolated verses or sentences which can be taken out of context. So we want to try to identify the whole, the piece. Try to identify sections that have a beginning, a middle, and the end. Because if we were to interpret an isolated sentence, an isolated verse, then we're in danger of doing proof texting and taking it completely out of context. And in the act of interpretation, it might be helpful to begin with the pericope, and then the chapter in which the pericope belongs, and in the book, and whether it's the Old or the New Testament, and then the whole Bible itself. Kind of like concentric circles. For example, this could be Psalm chapter 3 could be a pericope. Sometimes the pericope is a chapter of a book. Sometimes it is the written heading. Sometimes the pericope is not so clear. So Psalm 3 is identified as a Psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. So for example, when in verse 7, David says something like, "Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies on the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked." We have to understand that as David's emotions, his passion, his deep pain as he's trying to escape from his dear beloved son who's trying to kill him. Imagine the pain. So one of the documents that I'm requiring you to read is a close reading of the text and how to do the task of interpretation. So we want to look at the text itself, the cotext, the context, intertext, dealing with how to interpret, for example, the socio-historical setting, determination of boundaries, important words or motifs, and etc. So I encourage you to take a look at this as well. How to organize an exegesis? In many ways, it follows the organization of a regular research paper, beginning with the introduction and the thesis. What is the pericope about? What is your thesis on how to interpret what that pericope has to say? And how will you prove it? And in the body, which is about 3 paragraphs, is you trying to demonstrate and argue and prove why you believe that text is saying what you claim it is saying. And I think New Testament and Old Testament exegetical papers are perhaps helpful in that there are established tools you can use. Whereas maybe in a theological research paper, the tools, the methodologies may vary and be quite wide. In New Testament studies, there are things like, these tools that are provided, which will assist you as you do the task of interpretation. And there are some documents with working with original languages. And I just listed these as a kind of reference for you to look at. And it'll provide you with resources on how to work with the original languages.